Hey, YouTube. How is it going? I hope all is well. Today we are going to kind of do a follow-up / recap of the HT power supply video I made the other day. There are a couple things, there are a lot of things that needed to be explained, and there are some things in there that I don't think I explained very well. I just wanted to clarify those and do kind of like a part 2 to this to more or less like hone in on some of those things that maybe weren't made very clear. So let's go ahead. We're going to go to the screen and do that right meow. So we're looking at that same schematic from the other day. And let's just kind of recap a little bit on what we talked about. We talked about how an a tube rectifier versus a solid state rectifier are pretty much the same. The only thing that is different between these two, or the two, so tube rectifier versus solid state rectifier, is the limit to the size of the first reservoir cap in the network. So with a tube rectifier, you're limited to a size of capacitor in this position here at the A node. It's for a tube rectifier, it's usually somewhere between 33 UF being the largest size up to about 50 or 60 UF being the largest size that you can use. It is dependent upon the tube rectifier that you are using. So you do have to look that spec up. For an EZ81, 33 UF is about the largest you can use. For a GZ34, it's usually around 50 UF. I use 47. But in either case, the size really doesn't matter as much as one might think that it does. However, let's expand on that a little bit. The first reservoir cap is really not of any incident, really. The noise that is allowed in this section here is canceled out due to the way the output section works right here. Since it's powering the plates of the power tubes, and it's going through a transformer that basically wiggles things back and forth, any noise that is injected into this point right here is canceled out due to common mode rejection. So you don't really require a whole heck of a lot of filtering at the first node, because the activity of the output transformer itself takes care of a lot of that for you. So it's usually not of concern. Now, I did mention that the second node is where you kind of gain all your traction, and that's where you start to build all your ripple reduction and start to do all of your decoupling. Now, decoupling I did not very well clarify. So what is decoupling? So in the context of electronics, it is essentially the keeping one element of power away from another element of power, or having two types of power within a system away from each other, so that basically shunts high frequency signal, hash, and other noise out of the signal. Because the HT rail is technically a signal. It's an AC element that is riding on it, and we are trying to get rid of that AC element. Without the network that we create with the resistor and the capacitor, it would still just buzz away. It would have because it would go up to X voltage all the way back down to 0. While it might not be DC or AC, in that point, it still has a large voltage swing over a large, voltage. So it will make all kinds of noise, all kinds of racket, and you will not like it. So that's what the capacitance does, or that decoupling node does, is it makes it so those elements of the signal, the HT rail, if you will, away from the DC element of the amplifier, which is essentially all the components that are connected within it and ground. We were trying to create a battery. So, what is that filter network that we create? You'll notice or remember that we had a resistor first, followed by a capacitor. This makes a low-pass filter. A low-pass filter looks kind of like this right here. So we're shunting high frequencies away to ground. That's what we are trying to do, is get the hash and the noise and the high frequency element of all the noise being created to get it into being a DC signal, if you will, right? A DC power source. We're trying to get rid of all of that and shunt it away to ground, or decoupling it from the remainder of the circuit. Now, we have a practical limit, as we've already talked about, to how big you can go with these positions here. The practical limit is set by, again, the type of rectifier that you're using and your design goal. What is that design goal? So the A node, we've already kind of determined, doesn't really care about ripple and noise on that so much. Most of the action to get rid of noise, ripple reduction, and decoupling happens in the B node. The B node, as you can see, has an inline resistor. Sometimes it can also have a choke. Sometimes the choke can be over here too. There's a downside to that. We'll do that some other time. Generally leading with the choke first in your signal, in your HT signal, or not signal, but HT power rail, you have a limit. It derates basically the amperage that you can flow through this thing. So generally you see the chokes kind of in the B, in between the B node, in between the A and the B node, I should say. But once you get to this node here, even with the tube rectifier, there is no limit to how big you can go with the capacitance at this point. So once it's decoupled here, and once you get this resistor in there, you can go as large as you want with the capacitance from that point on. And as you recall, it didn't take much to get yourself kind of down to this zone right there. So let's go back to where we once were. I've kind of already done some stuff on this. So let's say we're going to go to 33 UF, and we knew that it was like 14 milliamps of current or something like that, right? So you can see here that we're decoupled all the way down to 3 hertz. That is to say that everything from 3 hertz and above is shunted away effectively out of the path and is no longer going to be a problem for you. 3 hertz is very, very much below the audible hearing range, 20 hertz being kind of the lowest practical range that we could possibly hear. Anything below that is more of a feel thing, but it's very low. I think the general rule of thumb is that you want to decouple at least 1 decade below the lowest frequency of interest. In the case of an amplifier that's made to amplify music, that would be, 20 hertz being the lowest practical that we need to amplify. That would mean that you want to get down to at least 2 hertz. Well, you can see here we're pretty close to that anyway. And 1 decade would technically just be 10 hertz anyway, but we're not worried about it. We're going all the way down. So 2 hertz, we're basically right there anyway. 1.2 hertz, that's going to be inconsequential. And you'll notice that we get 31.4 dB of ripple reduction or ripple attenuation. So this is the hash. This is the that rides along the signal, if you will. It's not the signal, but the HT power rail. That is what we're trying to get out of the amp. Now, I mentioned that 70 dB is kind of like the minimum that you should shoot for in terms of total reduction. Well, every node that you have reduces and adds up. So if you reduce 40 dB here and you reduce 30 dB here, that's 70 dB. You have all the ripple reduction or attenuation that you need. The only thing that you care about at these points now is the low corner frequency, or the hertz that you decouple from. Now, the reason that you want to get the hertz down that low is that at the corner frequency, there can be ringing. So if you can imagine that, you only get it down to 80 hertz. Let's just say you only rolled things down to 80 hertz. And you go and you play your low E string on your guitar. Well, that's about 80 hertz roughly, right? Well, that can cause this thing to ring, and that will oscillate and could possibly go uncontrollably into oscillation, if you will, and it would sound bad. It would start to ghost note. So anything that was dissonant to that, it would start to fight against it, right, or harmonize against it, which would cause all kinds of weird ghosting notes and other kinds of problems. Not to mention the fact that the power supply would start to basically become unstable as this noise from here below starts to interact with other frequencies that are amplified. So that's why we're shooting for as low as we can go. Now I'm going to show you why there's a practical limitation to how low you can go. So let's say we don't bother with the resistor at all. Well, let's back up a little bit. Let's clarify why we don't really want to mess with the resistor too much. The voltage drop that you have, or that you are looking for each node, determines the size of the resistor that you can use. If you must have 25 volts between this node and this node here, dependent upon the current draw of everything from this node down, so in the future of it, right? So this is the B node, the C node, so everything would be calculated for the B and C node together. That will determine the size of this resistor. In this case here, in order to drop 25 volts, because that's what they're dropping here, we need to have something along right here. So we're going to say it's 15 ohms or 15 milliamps, right? Nah, it's a little bit more than that. Maybe it was 17. I can't remember. I think the schematic might be a little bit different than the other one I had, but there it is, 25.5 volts. I can't remember what number we had there yesterday, to be honest, but I know that the preamp tubes of 12AX7s only draw roughly 1 milliamp apiece. So, imagine that there's 15 milliamps between these two here in the screens. But whatever, we're not really worried about that anymore. So that resistor size and the amount of current from each of these remaining nodes is going to determine, or is determined by that voltage drop that you want. So if you have to have that 25 volts and you can't go any more or less than that, that is the size of the resistor that you must use, and that's going to factor in what you're going to get in terms of your low frequency cutoff point and the amount of attenuation. So if you need more low cutoff, so let's say it's sitting up at like 15 hertz or something, let's make it go to 15 hertz. Let's do an 8 UF and see what that gets us. There you go. So with an 8 UF, it would be way too low. Very, very little, if any, attenuation at all. 20 dBs, probably not enough. And 13.26, you're kind of brushing, you're brushing death. So 16 UF will increase that by a significant amount, cutting that roughly in half. You'll notice that the ripple reduction did not increase, appreciably, but at least your low cutoff came down. So 16 is probably not high enough. 33, as we already know, gets you down to about 3 hertz. But let's just say we're going for gusto. We're going to go for broke. This is where we're going to find out that there's kind of a practical limit to how big you can go, and it no longer starts to matter anymore. So let's put 100 UF in there. 1 hertz, you've got 41 dB now. That's a lot. That's pretty good for one stage to get an attenuation. Like, you're already halfway where you need to be. Well, 1 hertz, that's pretty dang good. Well, let's double it again to 200. You think it's going to get much better? A little bit. You cut it in half, right? You double the size, you get half the amount back. Now, at 0.53 hertz, you've gone as far as you need to go. You don't really need to get much more than 50 dB out of one stage and 0.53 hertz. So let's go to 1000 and see what kind of difference we get. You think it's going to go all the way to 0? No, but it'll get you within a tenth of it, and you get 61 dB of ripple attenuation. Now that's really good because you're literally getting rid of all the ripple all the ripple that you need to get in nearly one stage. 60 dB is not too bad, considering you still got at least 1, maybe 2 more stages to go, right? But this thing here is going to be huge. That's a 1000 UF at 500 plus volts. That thing is going to be really, 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 really big. So again, there's a kind of a practical limit to where you can go. But again, we're not really worried about noise that much still at this position here. It's a little more important, but it's not the end of the world important. Keep in mind that the screens are still wiggling back and forth. It's working in tandem with the plate a little bit. They do control current through the tube, but it's, again, not as important at this node, but more important than the A node for sure. But let's see what happens as we go further down the line. So we had 8.2K. with a 16 UF is what they did on the third node. And we know that it's about 2 milliamps, a little bit more than that. So this is the voltage drop that you're shooting for. So you're looking from 280 to 270. So we're actually looking for 10 volt drop. Yeah, this is a different schematic. It's been adjusted a little bit from the one I saw yesterday. So it's probably 1 point, I'm going to say 5. Yeah, closer. It's more like 1. We'll do 1. No, sorry, 1. Literally means 1. So it's a little over 1, right? 1.2, we'll say. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. There it is. There's our freaking 10 volts or whatever we got to knock off. But you can see that even with this at 16 UF and an 8.2K resistor on our third node here, the C node, we're down to 1.2 hertz and we've got 40 dB of attenuation. Add that up with the other one that we had, another 30 something. That is the 70 dB that you need of attenuation on the low end. It would be better to have more, but you've got at least 70 dB. You're good there. And at 1.2 hertz, you're never going to have any problem. There's nothing in that amp that's ever going to oscillate that low, luckily, right? So you can see how even if you wanted to go lower, you could by just simply going to 22 UF in that position. Now you're sub 1 hertz and you've got 42 dB. Let's say you really want to go for bit broke and you put a 30 UF there. 45 dB, so you've gotten literally more than half of what you need on one node, and you're down to about half a hertz almost. Well, you can go the other way. Let's say you need to drop a little bit more voltage. You want to get more than 9.8 volts of drop. You can put a 10K there, and we're going to see here that it's going to increase things even better for us, right? So that's how you can play with it. Again, the amount of voltage drop that you need will determine the size of the resistor that you can use. So that's going to determine this guy. And then whatever size capacitor that you want to use, you can use in any of these spots, sans this first one here if you're using an EZ81. Now, why does this not really factor in so much in terms of reservoir or whatnot when we're talking about ripple reduction and attenuation? Remember, the thing that makes a low-pass filter is that resistor and capacitor. If you notice here, there is no resistor in front of it. There is a small amount of, ripple reduction because there is inline resistance of the tube itself. It's generally pretty low, but if you have solid state, there is no resistance essentially, right? There shouldn't be technically any resistance. So with a solid state rectifier, this thing here is not really doing anything in terms of ripple reduction and hertz cutoff. What it's actually doing is just storing energy. It's just the reservoir cap. If you were to put a resistor in front of it, that's usually what they would call the sag resistor. And it's called the sag resistor because that's what it does. The highest amount of current is in the amp in this position, which means that any kind of need for power and the power rail is going to flow entirely through that resistor, which is going to cause sag. That's all. But even with, let's just say we had a very, very, very low resistance. So we're going to assume that we have a solid state rectifier in here. So we're going to go 0.25. 0.25 ohms, there's 250 ohms. And we're going to go with 1000 UF. So you can get near zero, right, on one node and get quite a fair amount of reduction if you have any kind of resistance. Keep in mind, cut this down again, it'll cut in half more or less. I doubt you're going to have 120 ohms of resistance even in a normal circuit. So again, if you're going like 0.05, which would be like 5 ohms, right, you can see how it's not really doing much to help you out. It does get you where you need to go, but in order to get any better, you got to do 2000. All right, and you can just see it doesn't really help you that much. So don't worry so much about this guy. You can go as big as you want. It's not going to get you much better in that node than the second node, which is doing all the work, because this circuit requires this resistor in order to make this capacitor do the work. So that's why you focus on your second node. This node here, the B node, is the one where you do the brunt of your work. 1K5, you can go up to 2K if you want. Let's play around a little bit with that. So 2K, you're going to drop more than 25 volts, and we knew that we had 17 there. And let's say let's just do a low number first. Let's go with 8. 9.95, that's way too high. We were basically at 10 hertz at that point and only 21 dB. That's not enough. We can't do it with a 2K resistor and 8 ohms. You could try to go higher though. What if you go with a 10K? What are you going to get there? Well, you get closer to what you need in terms of that, but 10K, you're dropping 170 volts. Obviously, your power supply isn't going to be very useful at that point. So you're trying to go as low as you practically can there. Let's go with 1K and see what happens. So now you're dropping less voltage, and that's ideally where I would like to be in that node with this amp. 25 volts of drop right there is a little much for me. I like getting at least 300 volts on this node here if I can. And right about here, I'm shooting for like 15 to 20 volts in that node. That is that's me. That doesn't necessarily mean you. Some people want 25. Some people like that. Some people like more, but this is where I would kind of start. So 1K, 8 UF, not very good. That's 20 hertz. Like that's going to be a problem. That's not a low enough cutoff. And then there's essentially zero attenuation. Again, we're shooting for at least 30 out of the first node. If we can get more, that would be even better. So we're going to have to go up. Well, if we wanted, we could put any value you want or any value we wanted. Let's go with 47. So you can see much improvement. So with a 1K, it's smaller, but you can get your 30 dB of attenuation and get you down to 3 hertz. 3 hertz is low enough because, as you saw before, by the time you get to that last node at 8.2K, even with little or no, draw, you're I mean, if you kept the 47 UF in there, you're basically down to 0 hertz. Essentially, you're down to 0 hertz. You're not even half a hertz. So 33 is a somewhat standard number, half a hertz. Let's do 30. Again, it's not going to creep up all that much. And then again, if we go to 22, which is more standard, again, you're sub 1 hertz. And still 42 dB out of that one node. So that is how you kind of design your power rail. You have to know what voltage you're shooting for between each node. That determines the size of your resistor. Then you go with the size of the resistor. Oh, it's official. It's official. You've been burped upon. So it's actually an A-Tech show. Sorry. Excuse me. I don't know if you find it funny. I think it's kind of funny. I don't know. I don't mean to be rude. It's actually just, this is shot in real time. Like I'm not taking any breaks and doing any cuts and stuff like that. So there's no takesies, backsies, right? So you get to listen to me ramble on. Yay. So do remember, we're going to kind of wrap this up now. I think I made it pretty clear. Doesn't matter. Tube, solid state, whatever it is, you want to go with as big as you can because it does make sense. You have to think of this as like a pool. So the larger that number, the larger the pool, all right? The larger the pool, the more water it holds, right? The water is basically your reservoir, your energy that you can store. Well, too big and it takes a long time to fill that pool up, but it takes a long time to drain it too, right? So the hope is that it maintains a certain amount of, energy long enough, but it takes longer to charge it, which can be a problem because if you are able to deplete it, that means it's going to take a long time for it to catch back up, which can also cause ringing. So too big can be too big. Now, too small, obviously, you know what happens because you can hear it audibly and you can see how it would be just a mess. So you want to go as big as practical here. But as we've learned, there's kind of a limit to how big is too big. With solid state rectification, honestly, anything over 100 UF is probably bigger than I think you need to go. Some people like to put 1,000 in there. Totally fine. You can do it either way. I think most of the energy or most of the gains is made up in the second, the B node and the C node and subsequent nodes from there on out. Now, in my design, I have a fourth node. So I have a D node, if you will. I run the phase inverter on its own node, such as this one here. And then I have another node that goes to the C node or D node, which was my first tube. So you can imagine why I'm not trying to drop as much voltage here. Does it start to make sense now? I think in my amp, I have a little bit more voltage in it than this. This one's been adjusted down a little bit. I think the other one said it was like 335 or something, as I recall. But in either case, I have about 325 volts. So I've got another 20 volts on top of this. And I think I shoot down for right around 300 volts. Yeah, just a little, almost literally 300 volts here. I want to try to get 300 volts on my last node. So you can imagine I'm using slightly smaller values here, but I've got extra nodes. 70 dB, remember it stacks. So whatever you drop here in attenuation adds up with this attenuation here, which adds up with the subsequent nodes amount of attenuation. 70 dB is the lowest amount of attenuation you want. Any more than that, better. That's good. Again, low pass filter, you're trying to get down to about if you can get to 1 hertz, that's great. Anything below 5 hertz, I think you're going to be okay. I would say, honestly, that 2 hertz is kind of as low as you need to go. But if you can get lower, that's good. And as you can see, that's not improbable to do at all. My last stage, even in my amp, I'm using not an 82K. What am I using? I think I'm using a 4.7 is what I got. So it's going to basically jump up a little bit. Yeah, 1.5 hertz. And I've still got nearly 40 dB, but I've got an extra stage in front of that. So I'm well under 100 dB, or well over 100 dB of attenuation. So just things to keep in mind for that. So I think I made that pretty clear. Just to recap, right? The draw on your power rail from the subsequent nodes determines what resistor size you're going to use to hit your target voltage at that node, which will then determine what size capacitor you can use to get the amount of decoupling that you wish and ripple reduction, etc., etc. The attenuation compounds, so each node you get lower and lower and lower and lower amounts of ripple that you can hear or sense, if you will. Whereas the low frequency cutoff point, the lowest one wins. So if you're at 5 hertz at one and you're at 6 hertz on the other, you still have 5 hertz worth of decoupling going on. The lowest number wins. So it doesn't stack or compound as you go down. Whatever one is your lowest corner frequency, that is the one that sets the tone for the remainder of the amp. So if it's the first node and you get it all the way down to 0, the subsequent nodes don't matter anymore because you've already decoupled everything out from that point on at that point. So you got to kind of plan ahead in that regard. Remember, the second node, the B node, there is no limit to the size of the capacitor that you can use regardless of the type of rectification you're using. So if you're using a tube rectifier and you want to get a lot of ripple control, in the second node, the B node, you can go to your heart's content in capacitor size. The first node, though, you have to stick within the limits of the tube rectifier that you're using. With a solid state rectifier, there is no limit to the size, well, no practical limit anyway, to the size of capacitor that you can use for the reservoir cap. I would say that once you get above 1,000 UF, you're off the reservation at that point. Too much of a good thing is still too much, right? So I hope that clears some things up on how to start getting your head around looking at these schematics here and getting an idea for what each of these nodes do, why these values were picked, and how you can plan out the number of nodes that you want. You can only power 2 tubes off of 1 node as a rule. There are people out there that do more, but as a rule, stick it to no more than 2. Anything after that, you're asking for trouble. I like to do 1 tube per node. So most of my amps, you can see why I keep them pretty simple, because I have 1 node for my phase inverter and I have another node for my preamp tube. So I have 4 nodes in my amp, in my 18 watt design, that is. So again, I hope this clarifies things. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Let me know what you think, your thoughts, and all that fun stuff. Take care. We'll see you in the next one.